Welcome to Fridays with Fintelekt. My guest today is Irfan Yar, research fellow and member of the advisory board at the Global Counter-Terrorism Institute. Irfan is a double master's with an MA in International Relations and Area Studies, as well as an MA in International Affairs from the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs, Carleton University, Ottawa, Canada. Irfan completed his BA honors in political science, and his research focuses on Afghanistan, the Taliban insurgency, terrorism, and Islamist extremism. Irfan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Shirish, for your wonderful, introduction. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
Super. So Irfan, to start with, can you give us a brief overview of the research work that you're currently engaged with, just so that our audience can understand better what you do?
Well, as you mentioned in the introduction, currently I work as a director for research and internal affairs at the Global Counter-Terrorism Institute. I look after, the research issues, mainly focusing on terrorists and their, different aspect of operation. As you might know that Global Counter-Terrorism is a newly established educational institute, and we provide courses and diplomas in different security related fields. So pretty much I'm busy in those works. And in the background, like as a freelancer, I also make reports and write articles on counter-terrorism issues.
So Irfan, would you regard the progress achieved in the fight against terrorism and terror financing in the last few years as significant? And what would you say has been the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, it's a very interesting question. As we know that the term terrorist financing is an umbrella topic that include different, sources of income for different terrorist group. And as you know, it usually involves fundraise, from legitimate sources such as personal donation and profit from, businesses, charitable organization, as well as funds from criminal sources, which includes drug trade, smuggling of weapons and other goods, fraud, kidnapping, prostitution, and extortion. So all these different sources, come under the overarching topic of terrorist financing. And if we see the current regulation of financial system, they are, much more advanced, especially after the 9/11. These new laws and rules were drafted, and advanced technology were brought in to fight the issues of terrorist financing. So we can say that serious steps have been taken by government and private industry to fight the problem of terrorist financing. But the real question is, has these regulation and advancement in technology curb terrorism? And this is extremely difficult to answer because we are not yet successful to find a causal relation between these two variables, by which I mean terrorist financing and the regulation by private industry such as banking and the government. But if we assume that finance is the bloodline of terrorist organizations, so following this logic, a smaller amount of fund available to a terrorist group means that a terrorist group is weaker, and if they have more financing, so there will be more terrorism. But if we look at the scale of terrorism all around the world, it is increasing. So again, the question is, if we are successful in preventing or curbing terrorist financing, then why there is so more terrorism around the world? Again, the fact is that this is very ironic that despite a fight against terrorist financing, tourism is increasing. And I think this is because most of the focus of these private industry and government corporation is focused on the conventional method of terrorist financing, which is banking, as I mentioned, charity donation and wire transferring, etc., etc. But what they have ignored is the most important are the biggest income source of terrorists, which is the state sponsorship of terrorism. And it is extremely difficult to regulate it because as we know that state, sponsor of terrorism include providing weapons to different, terrorist organization. It also provide financial resources and also, military equipment. So all these things are very difficult to regulate, and one of the problem and regulating state-sponsored terrorism is that usually this is conducted in a very clandestine manner. So you don't have proofs, and states usually deny the responsibility. And so that area is still open for terrorists, and they usually attain a great source of income from those loopholes. And when we talk about again the regulation of the terrorist financing, it is mostly working in the developed countries, and in the developed countries it's still left unregulated. Or even if a terrorist want to use some money transfer or transaction, they would usually prefer the old school system, which is Hawala and Hyundai and other those things. So and it's like you cannot have a record of those things. So again, the black market. And as far as the impact of COVID is concerned, many terrorist groups have escalated their war against their enemies, because the government or the normal markets, they were busy in their own challenges, which is tackling the COVID, and they were using those moments because attention was left from them to the problem of COVID, and they were relatively easily operating.
Irfan, there is a lot of research happening in this area, but do you think it is adequate enough? And do you think there is better understanding of terrorism and its drivers, whether it is political, economic, or social? And how would you say that the research that is happening currently in this area is actually impacting the counterterrorism response?
Shirish, as a learner of counterterrorism for many years, being, as an observer and as a participant when I was, living in those countries who are, which are still suffering from this menace, and I found that there is a huge volumes, of scholarship written on the causes and the driver of terrorism. However, there is still gap that needs to be filled. In every case, in every country need, a specific case study, which, when I was writing my research paper, major research paper, I found that there was a lot of, gap left when it comes to terrorism in Afghanistan. So usually what the mainstream scholar would do, they would, attribute the conflict and terrorism in Afghanistan to foreign actor, which is, the foreign countries' involvement in Afghanistan. And what they are lacking, or what is under research, is the domestic factor. As you mentioned, the socio-economic factor, which I believe strongly plays a very critical role, in the conflict and the rise of terrorism. And when I was, conducting my research, which was, that despite the U.S. has spent huge amount of, resources, it shed its soldier blood, spent billions of dollars in Afghanistan, but they were, even in 20 years, with their power of allies, not able to defeat the Taliban. And what I found was that the Taliban used to mobilize people. And, those insurgents groups are very, familiar with the situation on the ground. They know how to exploit the situation there so that they can divert, different pressure points toward its enemies. Be they, the poor economic situation, the corrupt government, or other, poor social, condition of the people who feel disillusioned or alienated by those government. So, those are the areas which are, under research, or less explored. And I would, strongly encourage, students and those who work on terrorism to, go beyond the conventional, factor or drivers of terrorism, dig deep and find the real causes of terrorism, which may be, more, like culture, social, or economic, rather than, political or security.
Irfan, let's speak a bit about sanctions now. How successful do you think economic sanctions have been in cutting off financing used for terrorism?
Well, when we talk about, economic sanction, they are usually applied, to state conventionally and are not diverted to and cannot be diverted to a non-state actor per se. Partially because non-state actors are, by default in the blacklist. So, states don't need, to sanction them. But economic sanction, I think it can serve as a very effective tool, to put pressure on countries, that sponsor or support terrorism. However, if we, speaking from the experience, in the last few years, uh, these sanctions are usually, not successful method of fighting, state-sponsored terrorism, because sometimes it can backlash. And a good example of this is U.S. sanction on Iran. Even though the U.S. sanction, crippled the economy of Iran, Iran, did not hesitate, to increase it as a, pressure point on the U.S. For example, when Trump withdrew in 2018 from the Iranian, nuclear deal, what Iran did was, of course, Iran is a weak state, and a weak state usually, would not confront a powerful state like the US. So what usually they do, they, try to take revenge or, achieve their foreign policy interest on clandestine manner, which in this case is, sponsoring terrorism. And the US military presence in Afghanistan was a good opportunity for Iran, to choke US, as a response, of its nuclear deal, which was, scrapped by Trump administration. So what they did, they start an increasing, started its proxies, equipped them, and increased attacks were happening on the US military bases in Afghanistan. And by this, Iran wanted to remind the US and other, a regional power that it has influence and it can, act if its national interest is threatened. So, also another failure of the economic sanction is that usually it harms civilians. We agree that maybe there are states who would be supporting terrorism, but if we sanction those states, they are the people who would be at the receiving end, which ethically, I do not believe in those kind of sanction. So what I think, more alternatives should be researched and brought into policies, which are more effective in, dealing with state sponsorship of terrorism and not harming, the civilians. So that will be an ideal situation. And also, mafia also plays a very critical role, in terrorist financing. These groups usually exist for purpose of financial benefit, and these groups attempt to make a profit, through every means they considered are necessary. In fact, making money from illegal sources is their primary goal. And in order to make money, sometimes they also, establish strong links with terrorist groups, be it, kidnapping or, transferring, drugs through international borders. So all these, groups are playing very important role. And as far as the cryptocurrency and cyber crimes are concerned, since I'm not very expertise on that, so I will leave that to some other experts.
Let's speak a bit more about state actors. You mentioned them previously. So, there is a growing trend of state actors, I mean, beyond Iran and North Korea, being involved in illicit activities. So whether it's cybercrime, evading sanctions, or abusing crypto. Now, do you see this manifesting as a significant threat going forward, and how?
Well, again, as I mentioned, this is a very, like broadly speaking, if we look to any terrorist organization or group, usually in broader terms, it has two support. First, it's a domestic, and second, it would be, the foreign support, which usually in this cases are states. And there are, certain states which, as I mentioned, for achieving its foreign policy objective are to survive in this, so-called chaotic or, a world. They would always, leave no stone unturned, to support those groups because it is a means of their survival. Iran is an ideal example, and Pakistan is also very notorious and is recognized and accused of sponsoring terrorism, especially in countries like Afghanistan and India. But interestingly, we would see Iran and the U.S. Department State list of state sponsoring countries are those who sponsor terrorism, but we won't see Pakistan there. And many object why Pakistan is not on that list. Well, it's up to the U.S. This is the best answer we can say because U.S. At the same time want to keep Pakistan as its non-NATO ally in the region, and if it enlisted Pakistan is a state who sponsor terrorism, it would, deteriorate its relationship with Pakistan. So again, it's a very, subjective, topic, to be discussed. And another example that I usually give to people is if we ask, an American, who are, states who sponsor terrorism, their answer would be maybe Iran or Pakistan. But if we ask a citizen, who is hostile to America and ask who is sponsoring terrorism, they will say it's the America. So it's always, political and very subjective. And this is no surprise because there was time in history when the Western power, did supported, militant groups like during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, Western powers did, equipped, trained, supported the Mujahideen, who later on, muted to be more dangerous, militant groups. And the same was its involvement in the Latin America and Cuba. They were trying to change the regime and, supporting, many militant groups on the ground. So it's always, dynamic changing on the relationship between states.
Having said all this, Irfan, do you find yourself optimistic about the existing counter terror financing framework? What more do you think can international organizations, let's say, such as the FATF, do in terms of influencing policies or setting better standards around countering terrorist financing globally?
Well, I don't have much knowledge, or very expertise on this issue, but my personal thinking would be that, there still needs to be done more, in improving the policies that can fight, this menace. The government, for example, should also consider the fact that state-sponsored terrorism, as I mentioned, in fact, this is the largest source of funding to many militant groups, which, need more macro level policies and our international level cooperation. Second, I would say that while preventing terrorist financing is a great work, especially by institutions such as banking and others, it cannot eradicate the sources of terrorists. You will a bank person or say a Western Union dealer may be able to identify. They will freeze the money for some time, but it cannot eradicate the sources where it's coming from. And usually terrorists try to find alternative sources, or sometimes they can outsmart, those conventional sources. So what I think is the best, possible case is, I understand that, every institution has its own role to play, and that is the role of, banking or financial institution. But the ideal situation would be if those institutions collaborate with other institutions such as, government agencies responsible for fighting terrorism in broader sense, and share data and adopt a holistic approach that would, in a better way tackle the issue. And also, currently drug trafficking is thought to be the most significant source of income for, both terrorist and international criminal organization, and for a greater, cooperation or to tackle this problem, there is a need for international cooperation, because it's in transnational organized crime, which need people or authorities from more than one country. So international level cooperation would be an ideal platform to play a crucial role in curbing this menace. Also, sometime we will see that it's not always the money which is transferred to terrorism. Sometimes it can be items which carries tremendous value, for example gold. And there have been cases where the criminal used to smuggle gold or other precious items in order to trade for drug or exchange with cash. For example, and there was a case in which a drug dealer he melted gold and make nails and then painted it with gray color, and he was able to successfully transfer those gold which acquire or has tremendous value and trade in drugs. So we should the financial institution and authorities should also be careful to monitor things other than money, which carries a very good asset.
My final question to you, and I know you covered a bit of this earlier as well in the previous question. So, in closing, what is the advice that you would give to banks and other reporting entities globally on what they should be doing to really help in the fight against terrorism financing?
Well, as a learner, of terrorist financing or terrorism, counter-terrorism in general, the first and foremost advice, that I would give to private sector or government is that they should increase their cooperation with the law enforcement agencies. For example, if any banker or any platform, if they see any suspicious activity, they should, I think, immediately flag that activity and contact the authorities so that they can start their further investigation. And by that investigation, they can find more people or those circle who can be linked to that that organization. Second, corruption is a source of money laundering, as it generates large amounts of proceed. Sometimes some groups seek to neutralize or nullify government and private organization by offering them bribe. So if there is if there are corruption or there are corrupt employees in an organization, they can play a very critical role and are in helping terrorists or criminals and transferring their money. So the great environment will be if there is less corruption, if they focus to eradicate corruption, or target those people who cooperate with those who have links with terrorists. So identify them will also be a very great step in achieving this menace, this success. Also, the institution should conduct a proper risk assessment and then follow proper procedure, train their employees and use advanced technology to monitor their customers, where things are coming from and where things are going, so that they can avoid those gray areas. And as I mentioned earlier, that in the developed countries, this system seems to be very well functioning. However, in countries like Afghanistan or say some countries in Africa, banking infrastructure or the international financial system. A small example of this is the Western Union or other platforms. They are not present in every province of those countries. So what they use are the very traditional sources of funding, which is again the Hawala system and Hundi. So if they regulate those kind of things and brought them to their attention, record them, it will also help reduce the threat of terrorist financing.
Excellent. Irfan, thank you so much for joining us today on Fridays with Fintelekt. It was a pleasure having you.
It was a great pleasure talking to you, Shirish, and hopefully I'll see you some other time soon.
Absolutely. I look forward to that.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.